Now we're going to take a look at an application problem. One of the great things about exponential growth and decay is they have lots of real-world uses. You'll use them in science, business, lots of different engineering type of applications. And so we can actually model exponential growth functions, or decay functions in this case, as well, with this common formula right here. And we call 1 plus r the growth factor, and of course if it were 1 minus r, that would be the decay factor. And what it'll do is it'll give us a growth rate, if you will. The r will be the rate that we're growing at, or that we're decaying at, and then we're raising it to a value of t, which is expressed in terms of time. The a value, if you recall from the graphing, was our y-intercept and what we would consider our starting point, or our initial given amount in any application problem. And so this is a generic model that we can use for a lot of real-world applications. So go ahead and try to work sample problem 3. It is complex the first time you see something like this, but you can work through it and come back and look at the solutions and fill in the gaps. Alright, for sample problem 3, we go all the way back to the beginning of the internet. We're pretty close to back in 1993, and you can see there were only 1.3 million internet sites, which was a pretty low amount compared to today's standard. And over the next 5 years, it actually increased 100% per year. Now it wants us to write a model for that. In this case, the model is S in millions after t years. Okay, so basically what we've got here, when it asks us to write a model, we want to use this idea of a growth factor. But when we write a model, we want to write a model that represents the given scenario. So we're actually going to have the number of internet sites, S. We started with an A amount of 1.3 million, so we have to write that in there. We had 1 plus the rate. Now this can get a little tricky. 100% actually goes back to a decimal of 1.0. And so we're going to raise that to a t number of years. So our model looks like this. Now, order of operations says we cannot multiply the 1.3 million times 2 because you have to raise it to the exponent first. So this is our model with the given exponent as a variable, and so that's what an exponential model should look like. Now, we want to know how many host sites were in 1996. Well, if this started in 1993 and we have in the t and then in the number of years, we actually have to figure out how many years that was. And so there has to be a little bit of work done here first. So we know that 3 years is going to represent our t in this situation, so we're going to say S equals 1.3 times 2 to the third power. And if you put that into your calculator, just 3 years later we had over 10 million websites. Alright, now it wants us to graph the model. Now you could simply do this. You could input your t and get your output with a number of S values. And so if you inputted 0, we know that our initial was around 1.3 million. We already did for 3, which is about 10.4 million. If you plugged in, let's say 5, you get to roughly 42 million. Now how do you graph that? Well, I've given you quadrant 1 here because this is only realistic for positive values, and you would have to make up your own scale. And so this is key that you do this correctly. And so you want t for our input values, you want S for our output values. And to graph this, we have to come up with a different scale for each part. And so for the years, I'm just going to simply say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But that won't work for the internet sites. So we have to come up with a different model. So I'm going to do it a little differently. So I'm going to say 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, and 30. But this is in millions. And so we get a clear indication. And so if you look, our first point is 0x. roughly a million, and that's telling me in year 1993 we had 1.3 million. 3 years out we had a little over 10 million. 5 years out we were a pretty good ways up there, and you can see that follows my exponential growth model pretty decently. So you're just going to have to get comfortable scaling your own graph there. And then our last question says to use the graph to estimate when there were roughly 30 million internet sites. So we can take 30 million internet sites and kind of work our way backwards. That's a very, very rough estimation, about 4.5 years. And so 4.5 years in would be 1997. And so we'll teach you a more exact way to get that figure in later lessons.